Well, that's what happens when somebody asks you to build some shelves, but they give you complete license to build whatever you want. There are so many great ideas out there, it was difficult for me to pick just one. But I had to fit within my build window time and my build window budget. This is Dave with Level Up Woodworking, and let's get started. Now for this project, I had some premium walnut available that I thought I could make one shelf out of. I did have to add a few strips of walnut to it to make it wide enough for the shelf, but otherwise it's just beautiful wood and I love working with it. In addition to that, I purchased some basswood because it's got a really contrasting color to the walnut, and it was very inexpensive, to be honest with you. And so I thought I wanted to try that. I've never worked with it. It's nice wood. It's very, very soft, but was good to work with. For this particular project, I decided to make an investment in a couple of new saw blades, both a rip and a crosscut blade. I never thought that it would make that much difference in the quality of cuts on my wood, but it was phenomenal. I just couldn't believe it. And so I'm very happy I made those investments. I'm going to use those blades selectively. I've got a couple of general purpose blades I can run with, but when I do special projects where I want to cut nicely, I'm going to use those particular blades. Now, one thing I do have to worry about from time to time is cutting these strips of wood, and you could see a piece went into my dust chute there, and guess what? That's how my dust chute gets clogged up. So I got to keep an eye on that. I was able to stop the saw and get that one particular piece out, but I have clogged it up before in the past because of that, and that's not a good thing. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't he use a piece of slab with a live edge for a shelf? Maybe even put a little epoxy in there to fill up some gaps and coat it with some Rubio monocoat to make it look beautiful. Well, everybody's doing that right now, and I kind of want to do something different. Now, premium walnut isn't necessarily different, but combining that with the basswood for that contrasting colors, boy, I thought that was kind of nice. I really liked the way that turned out, and you'll see that in the end when I finish the project. This is ready to assemble. This is premium walnut, and this is the base shelf for the whole unit. The other two are basswood, very soft wood, very light wood, which will go on top and the bottom at angles, and I'm going to cut angles on those shelves as well, so hang on for that one. I have to drill holes in this, put the screws in, and then cap those. And I'm going to cap those with these that I showed you a little earlier that I made, which came out of the exact same wood, so it'll match in color. For this main shelf, I decided to screw it together for all the joints. I wanted it to be extra strong because it carries the load of the other two shelves that attach to it. And I just drilled a hole for a cap and then put another hole in there for a clearance hole for the screw, just to make sure it fits really snug, and then I'll cap these off when I put it together. For this shelf, I've decided, as you know, to use screws to put this together. And I did add a third hole here off camera because I just wanted to make sure this was going to be as strong as can be. I have drilled not a clearance hole, but a snug fit hole for this 2-inch screw that I have. And then I will drill a slightly smaller size hole through that into the block for the screw to go in. So I get a nice, good, snug fit, but I don't want to worry about the wood cracking as I put the screws in. There's a wide variety of different joinery methods I could have used here. Probably one of the more popular ones right now is the Festool Domino. Of course, that thing costs a lot of money, and I don't have one of those. Could have doweled this. I ended up doing that on the other two shelves. Make this a nice, clean line, clean looking shelf, and really display the grain of the wood and not take away from that by doing some fancy kind of joinery. Now when I make plugs for this, I try to use a piece of wood that matches the wood that I'm working with, in this case walnut. When I cut the plugs out, I have a rough end from the bandsaw when I cut them off, so I try to use the smooth end so I can line up the wood grain. That way I'll get a much better look. And I use a Q-tip to put the glue on the inside. I break it off, run it all the way around the inside, and that way I don't get too much glue on the surface. And I also bevel the end that's going in, and it's usually the bandsaw end because I can see the grain on the other side. That way I can hammer it in before I cut it off and plane it and sand it. Okay, I'm going to cut this off. You want to get low, but you don't want to get so low you're cutting the wood itself. You just want to cut the dowel. So I'm stopping every now and then just to make sure that I'm not hitting that. Looks like I'm okay. There we go. This was also given to me by a friend, which I really appreciated. He's a very fine woodworker, made a living doing that. And he also gave me this Japanese planer, which I think is very interesting. And you pull it towards you instead of away. And I just want to get the surface. I'll sand the rest, and that's about it right there. There we go. Okay, for the top and the bottom shelf, I'm actually going to cut a taper on the shelves itself. And then on the side pieces, I'll cut an angle to match that. And I'm using a kind of a homemade taper jig. So I really like to kind of build my jig for the job. And this is probably, I don't know, fourth or fifth time I've done this. So I cut a piece of plywood that is parallel to the fence and the blade. And just put a couple blocks of wood in place with a few clamps. I want the clamps tight, but a few clamps to hold the piece of wood in place and cut the angle. Now I want to be able to cut an angle on the blocks on the end. And I'm using a piece of wood from the taper jig. This is the rough side, but this is the right angle, and this was square. So I'm going to use this to approximate the angle of the blade so that I can cut the right angle on this. And of course, if I would have measured the angle on my taper jig, say 15 degrees, I could easily use my electronic angle measurement device. I can't think of the name, but to set this at 15 degrees, but I didn't do that in part because I like to make my own taper jigs, so that's the way it goes. Anyway, I'm going to sneak up on this angle and try to get it right on, and then I can do all 4 pieces. It'll be pretty quick. Now for the hard part, matching up that angle from the top and bottom with the angle I needed to put on the side pieces. It was a little bit of a challenge. I figured I'd sneak up on it to try to get it right. Well, I think I got lucky because that first cut got the angle exactly where I want. All I have to do is cut off the excess on the back side. For this set of shelves, I'm going to be using a line dowel to go in on both sides. I just have to set up my jig here to make sure I'm right on, and that is it right there. Set that, I will put these inserts in. Flip this over like this. I want to make sure I got the right side here. And I do. Now the key is to get this lined up as perfect as you possibly can. And there's our marked holes right there. Okay, there's my fit. Pretty happy with that. Finished doweling the second shelf. Got a few problems to work on here I want to show you. First one is right here. The angle's off just a little bit. Then if I go over to the other side here, I'm actually off quite a bit. And that's unfortunate. But I hope to correct most of that, if not all of it, after I glue it when I use my planer. So we'll see how I do. I have to say I don't have a lot of experience using a Japanese plane, but having this one given to me by a good friend, I'm working on becoming an expert. Just take your time, go slow, and very happy with the results. This is a technique I've used a number of times to fill in the slightest gaps in the wood. Apply a little bit of glue to the gap, and I usually try to use a needle and then sand it, and that dust from the sand will fill the gap. I'm about halfway done on the finishing project on these shelves, and I thought this would be a good time to really kind of talk through all the steps I've gone through in this process. And I guess I started with sanding, and I started with 100 grit sandpaper, then 150, and then 220. After I finished with 220, I went through and took a wet rag and washed each shelf down to kind of get the grain of the wood to stand up a little bit. Now I'm going to go back and sand each one again with 220. And then I'm going to wipe it down with mineral oil to get all that dust off it. And then I'm going to use some natural Danish oil to finish this, and I'll put 2 coats of that on. That'll really give this a nice sheen to it. So that's the kind of the process I've gone through. It takes a while, but I think it's worth it in the long run. Finishing your wood is such an important part of your entire project. And, you know, this Danish oil that I put on, you know, after 3 levels of sanding and cleaning and mineral oil and everything, really, really brings out the grain in the wood. It's just beautiful. Look at that walnut. It's amazing. Hey, I'm ready to bolt these together. And I'll bolt them together when I install the shelves, and you'll see that in a little bit. But I want to be able to drill the holes here and then just bolt them together on site. And I'm using these capture bolts, and you can see up in the corner there what they look like. I've had very good success with these. I've used them several times before. They got a big head on them, and they actually capture the end of the cabinet, and I think they'll work really well. I've got two different drill bits, one for the screw and one for the shoulder. And the shoulder, I'm only going so deep, so it's going to be a nice snug fit. At this point, it was just a matter of marking and drilling the holes for the hardware and doing the final installation. I decided to attach the top and bottom shelf on site after I installed the walnut shelf and had it securely fastened to the wall. I just thought it'd be a little easier that way than managing this whole unit. And the installation actually went very well, I think because of that. And here's the final product. Our shelves are being used for a lending library at our local spiritual community.